We must be careful not to over-spiritualize or put persecuted Christians on an unwanted pedestal. Very often they're close to Christ because they're forced to be, and they tell us this. If Christ is not a fierce reality as a lover and a person in my life, I won't get through this day. That's what many of them say. And most of us, of course, don't have that kind of pressure where we're forced to call on Christ as a matter of life and death. Indeed, very often when persecuted Christians leave their kind of hothouse and come to the West, for example, they lose their fervour quite frequently because this crucible context is gone. Remember the Li Chen-en parable that we told in an earlier session. It's the choice that makes us faithful. And if you take that choice away, it becomes harder to be faithful in a world where we are far removed from life and death, at least on a daily basis. So the spiritual hazards of the persecuted church, what are they? The first hazard is a most significant one. Persecuted Christians tend to feel forgotten. They feel forgotten by the world at large. They feel forgotten by the body of Christ. Definitely internationally, but often locally too. And the persecutor knows this and is often careful to maximize the sense of isolation and abandonment. Perhaps placing Christian prisoners in cells with those who are very unsympathetic or even insane. And this causes an immediate struggle to have fellowship, and it creeps into their minds and their hearts that the rest of the world doesn't care. All communication is cut off, and that can sometimes even apply to God. Why has God allowed this? Why doesn't God speak? Why does God not care anymore? So one of the biggest issues that we find in the spirituality of the persecuted is that they are very well set up to survive and thrive short periods of incarnation. But when they languish long after they have said to God, okay, I've learned what I need to learn, but I'm coming into my 5th year of jail, it's the time element that distresses them the most. Has God forgotten about me? I was ready for this. I've been winnowed. I'm stronger. Let me go. Why am I still here? I remember a wonderful story from Alexander Ogorodnikov. He was a Christian we prayed for a lot in the old Soviet Union. He's still alive in Moscow today. He was an amazing Christian, and he was put in jail for 9 years into the Gulag, 1978 to 1987. That was because of his Christian witness as the leader of an underground student movement. It was called Christian Seminar. And one day he was so discouraged and he wanted to give it all up. And the camp commandant noticed this and he thought, this is my chance to finish him off. So he said, let's put him in the cold cell for the night. And this was a special cell that was exposed to the outside. Ice coated the walls, and most people who spent a night in that cell froze to death. But it enabled the camp to call it an accident, and they would carry out the rigid corpse in the morning. So Ogorodnikov was pushed into this cell, and he just lay down, and he expected to die. But as his eyes closed, he began to hear a sound, a voice, then more voices, voices in different languages. A wall of sound came over him, hundreds, thousands of people speaking different tongues. And then he began to hear his name mentioned, and then again and again. And he realized that he was being given a kind of special dispensation to hear the prayers of the saints around the world on his behalf. And he said, as soon as he realized this, said, I felt a draft of air blow over me. It was warm. It thawed me out. It stayed all night. In the morning, when his jailers came to carry away his stiff and icy body, they found a young man sitting healthy and rejoicing and not a bit cold. In fact, he was warmer than they were. Not everybody, though, has an Alexander Ogorodnikov experience. It is a big spiritual hazard. Persecuted Christians feel forgotten, and this is often why a big feature of their spirituality is to sing hymns, because hymns are a way they can connect to the wider body as well. Then a second great hazard is legalism. There is a tendency to get quite legalistic in a persecuted setting. They struggle to hold on to grace. Now, it's very understandable how this emerges in an underground setting. A stranger appears in the fellowship. Who are they? Are they a spy? How can we tell if they are friend or foe? So you have to set them tests. And these tests tend to be quite external. And all of a sudden, you've constructed an elaborate system of external conformity. If you do these 10 things, we know you are one of us. And that can often lead to a kind of Pharisaic mentality and a legalism, and they lose their hold on grace. I remember hearing a series of lectures on the early church by the great historian James Bradley, and he said that it took the church only about 30 years after the death of Paul to largely forget his emphasis on grace. If you look at the letters of some of the very early church fathers, like Clement of Alexandria or Ignatius of Antioch, they're often quite legalistic. The focus is back on earning the favor of God. But that's what tends to happen in underground communities. It's not wrong to insist on conformity to rules, but the tendency is it gets pushed too far, and you end up with a legalism that weakens one's hold on grace. I see this quite often in the Chinese church on my travels. I often characterize the Chinese church as the church of 1,000 commandments. You go into the service with 10, and you come out after hearing the sermon with another 100. You're exhausted because you have been given another 100 ways to earn the favor of God. Now that's Pharisaism. In China, there's a very specific address of that. It's from family dynamics, it's from a kind of hard cultural Confucianism, but it's hard, it's Pharisaic, it's legalistic, and that's a hazard.